The moment my stepfather's fist connected with my face in the church bridal suite, I thought my wedding day was ruined forever. Blood dripped onto the white lace of my gown as I stumbled backward, my vision blurring. But then I saw him in the doorway, my fiancé's best man, Lieutenant Jake Morrison, standing perfectly still with his phone raised and recording. His expression wasn't shocked or panicked. It was calm, almost satisfied, like a hunter who'd finally cornered his prey after years of patient tracking. He lowered the phone slowly, meeting my stepfather's furious eyes, and said 5 words that changed everything. "Derek Lawson, you're under arrest." What I didn't know was that Jake had spent the last 18 months building an ironclad case against the man who'd terrorized me for 12 years, documenting every threat, every bruise, every calculated moment of cruelty. My wedding day wasn't the end of my nightmare. It was the beginning of Derek's reckoning, and he'd walked straight into a trap he never saw coming. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Rachel Martinez, and for 12 years I'd been telling myself that the violence would stop once I left home, once I got married, once I was finally free from Derek Lawson's reach. I'd spent my entire adult life walking on eggshells, measuring every word, reading every mood shift in the man my mother married when I was 16. He'd entered our lives 6 months after my father died from a heart attack, arriving at one of Mom's grief support groups with flowers and kind words and a patience that seemed endless. Within a year, he'd moved into our home in Riverside County. Within 2 years, he'd completely taken over our lives. The first time he hit me, I was 17. I'd forgotten to take the trash out before school, a simple teenage oversight that sent him into a rage I didn't understand. My mother made excuses. "He's under so much stress at work, Rachel. You know how hard he's trying to provide for us. You need to be more considerate." I learned quickly that in our house, Derek's anger was always justified and my pain was always my fault. The bruises were always in places clothing could hide. The verbal attacks always happened behind closed doors. To the outside world, Derek Lawson was a respected sales manager at Patterson Industries, a devoted husband, a man who'd generously taken on the responsibility of raising another man's daughter. I met Tyler Bennett 3 years ago at a coffee shop near Riverside Community College, where I was finishing my degree in elementary education. He was kind and steady, everything Derek wasn't, working as a civil engineer with a quiet confidence that made me feel safe for the first time in years. When he proposed last Christmas, I cried not just from joy but from relief. Marriage meant escape. Marriage meant a new last name, a new home, a legitimate reason to finally cut ties with the man who'd made my mother's house feel like a prison. Tyler's best man was someone he'd known since police academy days, before Tyler decided engineering was his true calling. Lieutenant Jake Morrison worked at the Riverside Police Department's downtown precinct, specializing in domestic violence cases. I'd met him half a dozen times during wedding planning, always finding him watchful in a way that made me slightly uncomfortable, like he could see through the careful mask I'd worn for so long. He asked questions that seemed casual but weren't. "How long have you known your stepfather, Rachel? Does he have a temper? Has your mother always been this quiet around him?" I deflected every time, changing the subject, laughing it off, protecting the secret I'd kept for over a decade. The wedding was set for June 15th at Riverside Community Church, a small ceremony with 70 guests. Nothing elaborate because Derek controlled the finances and decided what my mother could contribute. Tyler and I paid for most of it ourselves, which Derek made sure to mention repeatedly, reminding me that I was an ungrateful burden, that my mother had sacrificed enough raising me, that I should be ashamed of the expense. The morning of the wedding, I stood in the bridal suite at the church, Amanda Chin fussing with my veil while my mother sat silently in the corner, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes distant in that way they'd been for years. Derek had been drinking. I could smell the whiskey on his breath when he entered the suite, dismissing Amanda with a curt gesture. "Your mother and I need a moment with the bride." Amanda hesitated, glancing at me, but I nodded. "It's fine. Just a few minutes." I'd become so good at pretending everything was fine. The door closed behind her, leaving me alone with my mother and the man who'd made my life hell. He circled me slowly, examining the dress, the flowers, the careful makeup that had taken Amanda an hour to apply. "All this money wasted on a wedding," he said, his voice low and controlled in that dangerous way I knew too well. "Your mother could have used that money for the new roof. But no, Princess Rachel always gets what she wants." "Mom," I started, but she wouldn't meet my eyes. Derek continued, stepping closer, invading my space the way he always did when he wanted to intimidate. "I've put up with your disrespect for 12 years. Raised you like you were my own. And this is the thanks I get? You couldn't even invite my brother to the ceremony." "He wasn't on the list you approved," I said quietly, hating how small my voice sounded. "I don't approve anything," Derek snapped. "This is your mother's family too, or have you forgotten that in your rush to abandon her?" The accusation was so unfair, so perfectly calculated to wound, that I felt tears starting. "I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm getting married." "You're running away," he corrected, and his hand shot out, gripping my arm hard enough to leave marks. "You've always been selfish, Rachel. Just like your father. Weak and selfish." "Don't talk about my dad," I said, pulling away, and that's when his other hand moved, fast and brutal, connecting with my cheekbone with a crack that echoed in the small room. I fell backward, hitting the vanity, cosmetics scattering as pain exploded across my face. My mother gasped but didn't move, frozen in her chair like she'd been frozen for years, trained into helplessness by a man who'd systematically destroyed her will to fight. Blood dripped from my nose onto the white lace of my dress, bright red stains spreading across the bodice. Derek stood over me, breathing hard, his face flushed with rage and alcohol. "You want to leave? Fine. But you'll do it knowing what an ungrateful little wretch you really are." He raised his hand again, and I closed my eyes, bracing for another impact that never came. "Rachel, are you okay?" Jake Morrison's voice cut through the moment like a blade. I opened my eyes to find him standing in the doorway, his phone raised and pointed directly at Derek, recording. His expression was completely calm, almost satisfied, and in that instant I understood. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a coincidence. Jake had been waiting for this moment, planning for it, and Derek had finally given him exactly what he needed. Derek's hand froze midair, his eyes snapping to Jake with the kind of fury I'd seen 1,000 times before, the rage that came when someone dared challenge his authority. Jake didn't flinch. He stood there in his groomsman's suit, phone steady, his badge clipped to his belt now visible as his jacket had shifted. The recording light blinked red in the dim bridal suite, capturing everything. My stepfather's face cycled through emotions in rapid succession. Shock, calculation, then that smooth mask of reasonableness he wore so well in public. "Officer Morrison," Derek said, his voice instantly controlled, measured. "There's been a misunderstanding. My stepdaughter tripped. I was simply trying to help her up." Jake's expression didn't change. He tapped his phone screen twice, and I heard my own voice playing back. "Don't talk about my dad." Then the sound of impact, my cry of pain, the crash of cosmetics hitting the floor. Derek's voice followed, venomous and clear. "You want to leave? Fine. But you'll do it knowing what an ungrateful little wretch you really are." "That's interesting," Jake said quietly, "because what I just witnessed and recorded was a clear case of assault and battery. Derek, you need to step away from Rachel right now." My stepfather's hands clenched into fists. "This is a family matter. You have no right to interfere." "Actually," Jake replied, "I have every right. As a police officer and as a human being who just watched you assault a woman on her wedding day." He glanced at my mother, still frozen in her chair. "Mrs. Lawson, are you injured? Do you need medical attention?" My mother finally moved, shaking her head mutely, but her eyes were wide with something that might have been fear or relief or both. Jake returned his attention to Derek. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to walk out of this room calmly. You're going to wait in Pastor Brooks' office. And you're not going to speak to Rachel or Linda again without legal counsel present." "This is insane," Derek blustered, but his voice carried an edge of panic now. "I'm calling my lawyer." "You should definitely do that," Jake agreed. You're going to need one. Amanda burst back into the room, taking in the scene with immediate understanding. Oh my God, Rachel. She rushed to my side, helping me to my feet, grabbing tissues to press against my still bleeding nose. Tyler appeared in the doorway behind Jake, his face going pale when he saw me. What happened? His voice was deadly quiet. Your best man assaulted my stepdaughter, Derek said quickly, trying to seize control of the narrative. He's threatening me, interfering in a private family conversation. Tyler looked at Jake, then at me, then at the blood on my dress. The muscles in his jaw worked as he processed the scene. Jake wouldn't assault anyone, he said flatly. But I'm guessing you just did. Derek opened his mouth to respond, but Jake cut him off. Tyler, can you take Rachel to get cleaned up? Amanda, stay with her. Make sure she's okay. Mrs. Lawson, you should come too. Derek, Pastor Brooks' office. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Now. My stepfather's face darkened with rage, but Jake had positioned himself between Derek and the rest of us, and something in the lieutenant's stance made it clear that any aggressive move would be a serious mistake. Fine, Derek spat. But this isn't over. You've just made a terrible error in judgment, Officer Morrison. Jake's expression finally shifted, a cold smile touching his lips. No, Derek. You made the error. You just committed felony assault in front of a police officer with video evidence. Everything that happens from here is on you. As Amanda helped me toward the door, I caught Jake's eye. He gave me a small nod, and I saw something in his expression I couldn't quite read. Not pity, not even anger. It was determination mixed with something almost like vindication, as if this moment was exactly what he'd been waiting for. Tyler took my hand gently, his fingers trembling with controlled fury as he guided me down the hall toward another room. I could hear Derek's raised voice behind us, demanding to speak to someone in charge, insisting this was all a misunderstanding. The next 20 minutes passed in a blur. Amanda worked carefully to clean the blood from my face, revealing a swelling bruise along my cheekbone that makeup couldn't hide. My nose had stopped bleeding but was tender and possibly broken. She salvaged what she could of the dress, dabbing at the bloodstains with cold water, but the damage was obvious. Tyler paced the small room like a caged animal, his hands opening and closing as he fought for composure. I should have known, he kept saying. Jake tried to tell me. He tried to warn me months ago. What do you mean? I asked, my voice muffled by the ice pack Amanda had pressed to my face. Tyler stopped pacing, meeting my eyes with an expression full of guilt and anger. Jake's been investigating your stepfather for over a year, Rachel. He came to me 6 months ago with concerns. Said he'd noticed things, patterns, signs of abuse. He asked permission to look deeper, to document everything. I told him to do whatever it took to keep you safe. The words didn't make sense at first. Jake had been investigating Derek? For over a year? Without my knowledge? Amanda finished with the dress and stepped back, her own eyes filled with tears. I knew something was wrong, she said softly. The way you flinched sometimes when Derek's name came up. How you always made excuses to avoid family dinners. I asked you so many times if you were okay. I'm sorry, I whispered, shame washing over me in waves. I should have told you. Should have told someone. But he always made it seem like it was my fault, like I deserved it. A knock at the door interrupted us. Pastor Brooks entered, her lined face etched with concern. Rachel, dear, how are you feeling? She took in my bruised face and ruined dress with visible distress. I'm calling an ambulance. No, I said quickly, panic rising. If I go to the hospital, Derek will find a way to make this about me overreacting. He always does. He always makes everyone believe I'm the problem. Pastor Brooks exchanged a look with Tyler. Actually, Rachel, I don't think that's going to work this time. Lieutenant Morrison has already called for backup and a forensic photographer. There are 3 officers in my office right now taking Derek's statement. Your mother is giving hers separately. And Jake has requested that a detective he trusts come to document your injuries properly. This isn't something Derek can talk his way out of. I sat down hard on the small sofa, my legs suddenly unable to support me. This was really happening. After 12 years of hiding, of making excuses, of believing I was trapped, everything was unraveling in a single afternoon. But what about the wedding? I asked stupidly, as if that mattered now. What about the guests? They're all waiting. Tyler knelt in front of me, taking both my hands in his. Rachel, the wedding doesn't matter. You matter. Your safety matters. Everything else is just details we can figure out later. Amanda squeezed my shoulder. He's right. Besides, I think most of the guests are going to understand when they hear what happened. Pastor Brooks nodded. I've made an announcement that we're experiencing a family emergency and the ceremony will be delayed. People are concerned, but they're being patient. Another knock, and Jake appeared with a woman I didn't recognize. She was in her mid-30s, wearing slacks and a blazer, with kind eyes and a professional demeanor. Rachel, this is Detective Maria Santos. She's my partner and specializes in domestic violence cases. She needs to photograph your injuries and take your statement. Is that okay? I nodded numbly. Detective Santos moved efficiently, her camera clicking as she documented the bruise blooming across my cheek, the swelling around my nose, the red marks on my arm where Derek had grabbed me. She asked questions in a gentle but thorough manner. How long has this been going on? Has he hit you before? Has he ever threatened you? Does your mother know? Each answer felt like pulling shards of glass from an old wound. When she finished, she put her camera away and sat beside me. Rachel, what happened today is called assault and battery. It's a felony in Oregon. Combined with Lieutenant Morrison's video evidence and the witness testimony we're collecting, we have more than enough to press charges. But I need to know if you're willing to cooperate with prosecution. I looked at Tyler, at Amanda, at Pastor Brooks, all of them waiting for my answer. Then I thought about my mother, still trapped in Derek's control, still making excuses, still frozen by years of conditioning. I thought about the 17-year-old girl I'd been when his abuse started, frightened and confused and convinced she deserved it. Yes, I said, my voice stronger now. I'll cooperate. I'll testify. I'll do whatever it takes. Detective Santos smiled. Good. Because Lieutenant Morrison has been building something much bigger than just today's assault. He's been waiting for the right moment, and Derek just gave it to him. She glanced at Jake, who stood in the doorway with his arms crossed. You want to tell her, or should I? Jake stepped into the room, his expression serious. Rachel, I've been documenting Derek's abuse for 18 months. I have medical records, witness statements, financial records showing coercive control, and testimony from your former teachers and employers about suspicious injuries over the years. What happened today isn't an isolated incident. It's the culmination of a pattern, and now we have everything we need to make sure he never hurts you or your mother again. The words hung in the air like a revelation I wasn't prepared to receive. 18 months of documentation. Medical records I didn't know existed. Witness statements from people I'd assumed never noticed. I stared at Jake Morrison, this man I'd met only a handful of times during wedding planning, and tried to reconcile him with the reality he was presenting. You've been investigating my stepfather since before Tyler even proposed to me? Jake pulled up a chair and sat down, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp with focus. I first noticed something was wrong about 3 years ago at Tyler's birthday party. You came with a cast on your wrist, said you'd fallen down the stairs at home. But the way you held yourself, the way you avoided talking about it, triggered my instincts. I've worked domestic violence cases for 8 years. I know the signs. He paused, glancing at Tyler. Your fiancé mentioned in passing that your stepfather was strict, that family dinners were tense. Little comments that added up over time. So you just started spying on my family? The question came out sharper than I intended, defensive anger rising despite everything. Jake didn't react to my tone. I started paying attention. There's a difference. I asked questions. I watched interactions at the engagement party, at the rehearsal dinner planning sessions. And I made some calls to people who knew you growing up. He pulled out a tablet from his jacket pocket, tapping the screen several times before turning it toward me. The screen showed a spreadsheet with dates, locations, and brief descriptions. March 2022, concussion, claimed she hit her head on cabinet door. School nurse noted patient seemed frightened to go home. July 2022, bruised ribs, said she fell off bike. No bike ever seen at residence. October 2023, sprained ankle, missed 3 days of work. Supervisor noted Rachel seemed relieved when told she could work from home. The list went on, entry after entry, spanning years. Each line was a memory I'd buried, an injury I'd explained away, a piece of evidence I never knew someone was collecting. How did you get all this? Amanda asked, reading over my shoulder. Jake's expression remained neutral. Public records, mostly. School nurse reports are documented. Hospital visits create records. Workplace injury reports are filed with HR. I also spoke with your former guidance counselor at Riverside High, Mrs. Patricia Coleman. She remembered you, Rachel. She said she'd suspected abuse but could never get you to open up about it. She was grateful someone was finally looking into it. Tears burned behind my eyes. Mrs. Coleman had been one of the few teachers who'd really seen me, who'd asked gentle questions I'd never answered. I didn't know she'd cared enough to remember after all these years. Detective Santos took over the explanation. Once Lieutenant Morrison brought his concerns to our unit, we opened a preliminary investigation. We couldn't do much without your cooperation, but we could monitor the situation. We flagged Derek Lawson's name in our system. If any calls came in from your address, we'd be notified immediately. Did any calls come in? Tyler asked, his voice tight. 2, Santos replied. Both times, neighbors reported hearing shouting and things breaking. Both times, by the time officers arrived, your mother claimed everything was fine. Derek was always calm and cooperative when police showed up. Classic abuser behavior. He knows how to perform for authority figures. She looked at me with empathy. Your mother is protecting him, Rachel. Whether out of fear or misplaced loyalty, she's become an enabler. We see it constantly in these cases. Jake swiped to another screen on his tablet. This is where things got more interesting. About 6 months ago, I noticed Derek had a pattern of erratic behavior at his workplace. I reached out to some contacts at Patterson Industries where he works as a regional sales manager. Turns out there have been multiple HR complaints about his temper, his treatment of female employees, and suspicious expense reports. Nothing prosecutable on its own, but it painted a picture of someone with serious control issues. He handed the tablet to Detective Santos, who continued the explanation. We also discovered that Derek has a prior arrest from 15 years ago in California for domestic battery against a previous girlfriend. The charges were dropped when she refused to testify, but the arrest record still exists. This isn't his first time being violent with women. It's just the first time someone's been able to build a comprehensive case against him. The information kept coming, wave after wave of evidence I'd never imagined existed. Financial records showing Derek had taken out credit cards in my mother's name without her knowledge. Testimony from former neighbors who'd heard arguments and crashes through the walls. A statement from Dr. Emily Reed, a therapist I'd seen briefly in college before Derek found out and forbade me from continuing. She'd kept her notes, documenting my descriptions of fear and anxiety at home, even though I'd never explicitly named Derek as the cause. Why didn't you tell me any of this? I asked Jake, my voice breaking. Why let me go through all these months planning a wedding, thinking everything was normal, when you knew what was happening? Jake leaned forward, his expression serious and unapologetic. Because we needed you safe first, and we needed Derek to make a mistake. If I'd told you 6 months ago that I was investigating your stepfather, what would you have done? I opened my mouth to answer, then closed it. He was right. I would have panicked. I might have confronted Derek. I might have warned my mother. I definitely would have tried to stop the investigation out of fear of making things worse. I've been in this unit long enough to know that abuse victims often protect their abusers, Jake continued gently. It's not weakness. It's survival. You've spent 12 years learning how to minimize Derek's anger, how to avoid triggering his violence. If I'd brought you into the investigation too early, you might have inadvertently tipped him off. Tyler had been silent through most of this, but now he spoke up, his voice rough with emotion. Jake came to me 3 months ago and told me everything. Showed me all the evidence he'd gathered. Asked me if I was willing to help create a situation where Derek would finally reveal himself publicly, where we'd have witnesses and video evidence that couldn't be denied or explained away. I stared at my fiancé, feeling betrayed and protected in equal measure. You knew? This whole time, you knew what Jake was doing? Tyler's eyes were wet. I knew, and I hated keeping it from you. But Jake convinced me it was the only way to keep you safe long term. If Derek suspected we were onto him, he might have escalated. He might have seriously injured you or your mother before we could intervene. So we waited. We planned. We made sure that when he finally snapped, it would be in a place where he couldn't talk his way out of it. Pastor Brooks, who'd been listening quietly, spoke up. Lieutenant Morrison approached me 2 weeks ago. He explained the situation and asked if I'd be willing to cooperate if Derek became violent at the church. I agreed to install additional security cameras in the bridal suite and to be prepared to give a witness statement. I've seen too many women trapped in abusive relationships over my years in ministry. If I could help free you from that, Rachel, I was willing to do whatever was necessary. The scope of the conspiracy, if you could call it that, was overwhelming. All these people working together, coordinating, preparing for this moment. And I'd known nothing. I'd walked into my wedding day thinking I was finally escaping Derek's control through marriage, never realizing that escape had already been orchestrated around me. How many other people knew? I asked. Just the ones in this room, plus Detective Santos' supervisor and the officers who responded today, Jake said. We kept the circle small deliberately. The fewer people who knew, the less chance of Derek finding out. He pulled up another screen on his tablet. Now here's where things get serious. Based on the evidence we've collected, we're pursuing multiple charges. Felony assault and battery for today's attack. Multiple counts of domestic violence spanning 12 years. Financial fraud for the credit cards opened in your mother's name. And possibly coercive control, which Oregon recently added to its domestic violence statutes. What does that mean? Amanda asked. Coercive control recognizes that abuse isn't just physical violence, Detective Santos explained. It's the pattern of behavior designed to dominate and control another person. The isolation, the monitoring, the financial control, the degradation. All the things Derek has been doing to Rachel and her mother for years. If we can prove the pattern, and we believe we can, he's looking at significant prison time. My hands were shaking. Prison. The word felt surreal. For 12 years, Derek had seemed untouchable, a force of nature that couldn't be stopped or contained. The idea that he might actually face real consequences seemed impossible. What happens now? I asked. Now we need your formal statement, Santos said. Everything you remember, starting from when Derek first entered your life. Every incident of violence, every threat, every controlling behavior. It's going to be difficult and exhausting, but your testimony combined with our evidence creates a case he can't fight. Jake added one more thing. There's also the matter of your mother. She's giving her statement right now, but she's terrified. She might try to protect him, might minimize what he's done. We need you to be strong, Rachel. We need you to tell the truth, even if it means acknowledging that your mother stood by and let this happen. That statement hit harder than expected. My mother's complicity was something I'd avoided thinking about for years, the painful reality that she'd chosen Derek over protecting her own daughter. But Jake was right. If this was going to work, if Derek was finally going to face justice, I couldn't protect anyone anymore. Not my mother, not Derek, not even myself from the hard truth of what our family had become. The formal statement took 3 hours. Detective Santos recorded everything while Jake sat quietly in the corner, occasionally prompting me with dates or incidents I tried to forget. I started with the beginning, when Derek had seemed like the answer to my grieving mother's prayers, arriving at our lowest moment with charm and patience that felt like salvation. I described how gradually the kindness had shifted into criticism, then control, then violence. Each memory surfaced with painful clarity, wounds I'd thought had healed revealing themselves as merely buried. Tyler sat beside me through all of it, his hand gripping mine so tightly I could feel his pulse racing. When I described the first time Derek had hit me, Tyler's jaw clenched so hard I heard his teeth grind. When I talked about my mother's silence, her inability to protect me, Amanda wiped away tears from across the room. By the time I finished, my voice was hoarse and the sun had begun setting outside the church windows, casting long shadows across the room where my wedding should have already happened. Detective Santos closed her notebook and met my eyes with professional compassion. "You did well, Rachel. I know that wasn't easy." She glanced at Jake. "Your stepfather has been processed and is currently being held pending arraignment. His bail hearing is scheduled for Monday morning. Given the severity of the charges and the video evidence, I expect the judge will set bail quite high. There's also the matter of a restraining order." "I want one," I said immediately. "For me and for my mother, whether she asks for it or not." Santos nodded approvingly. "Smart. We'll file emergency protective orders tonight. Derek won't be allowed within 500 feet of either of you, and he'll be prohibited from any contact direct or indirect. If he violates it, he goes straight back to jail." She paused. "There's something else you should know. Your stepbrother Kevin has been trying to reach you. He's called the church 4 times in the last hour." My stomach dropped. Kevin was Derek's son from his first marriage, younger than me by 3 years. He'd lived with us for a few years after Derek and Mom married, but he'd moved out at 18 and we'd barely stayed in touch. "What does he want?" I asked. "According to Pastor Brooks, he's demanding to know what's happening with his father. He's claiming this is all a misunderstanding, that you've always been dramatic and unstable. He's threatening to come here if someone doesn't call him back." Jake's expression darkened. "Kevin Lawson has 2 DUIs and an arrest for bar fighting from last year. He's not getting anywhere near Rachel. I'll handle him." The protective instinct in his voice surprised me. This man I barely knew had appointed himself my guardian, had spent 18 months building a case to save me from a situation I'd never asked him to fix. Part of me felt grateful beyond words. Another part felt strangely violated, as if my trauma had been investigated and catalogued without my consent. As if reading my mind, Jake spoke up. "Rachel, I know this is overwhelming. I know you probably feel like your privacy was invaded, like decisions were made without your input." He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "But I need you to understand something. I've seen too many women end up in morgues because everyone around them noticed the signs but did nothing. I wasn't going to let that happen to you. Maybe I overstepped. Maybe I should have approached this differently. But I don't regret keeping you alive to be angry with me about it." The words hit with unexpected force. He was right. Derek's violence had been escalating. The wedding day assault wasn't random. It was part of a pattern that statistics suggested would eventually turn fatal. Jake had seen that trajectory and intervened before I became another statistic. "I'm not angry," I said quietly. "I'm just trying to process that so many people were working to save me while I was still pretending everything was fine." Amanda came to sit on my other side. "That's what abuse does, Rach. It makes you believe the lie that you're alone, that no one cares, that speaking up will only make things worse. But you weren't alone. You had people who saw the truth even when you couldn't." She squeezed my hand. "And now you have the chance to break free completely. Not just by marrying Tyler and moving out, but by making sure Derek faces consequences for what he did." Pastor Brooks returned to the room with news. "Your mother is asking to see you." She's in my study with one of the officers. I hesitated, unsure if I had the emotional energy for that conversation. What did she say in her statement? I asked Jake. He exchanged a look with Detective Santos before answering. She admitted Derek has a temper. She acknowledged today's assault happened. But she also made excuses, said he's been under stress at work, suggested you might have provoked him by being disrespectful about his brother not being invited. She's still protecting him, even now. The words shouldn't have hurt as much as they did. I'd known for years that my mother had chosen Derek's comfort over my safety. But hearing it confirmed, knowing she was still making excuses even after watching him split my face open on my wedding day, created a fresh wound that felt worse than the physical bruise on my cheek. Do I have to see her? I asked. You don't have to do anything you're not ready for, Santos assured me. But it might help to hear what she has to say. Sometimes abuse victims need to see the truth reflected back at them by the people they've protected. Tyler spoke up, his voice firm. I'll go with you. Whatever she says, whatever happens, you're not facing her alone. We walked through the quiet church hallways, our footsteps echoing on the polished floors. Through the stained glass windows, I could see guests still lingering in the parking lot, uncertain whether to leave or wait. My wedding day had turned into a crime scene, a spectacle that would be talked about in Riverside County for years. The bride who got assaulted by her stepfather. The ceremony that ended in handcuffs instead of vows. My mother sat in Pastor Brooks' study, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. At 52, Linda Lawson had aged beyond her years under Derek's control. Her hair was more gray than brown now, her face lined with stress and resignation. She looked up when I entered, and her expression crumbled. Rachel, sweetheart, I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. I stood in the doorway, Tyler's presence solid and reassuring behind me. You watched him hit me, Mom. You sat there and did nothing, just like you've done nothing for 12 years. She flinched as if I'd struck her. It's not that simple. Derek has been so good to us, provided for us. He just loses his temper sometimes when he's stressed. He doesn't mean it. Doesn't mean it? My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. He broke my nose, Mom. On my wedding day. In a church. And you're still making excuses for him. Linda's hands twisted in her lap. You don't understand the pressure he's under. His job, his responsibilities. And you can be difficult sometimes, Rachel. You know how you get when you're upset. The victim blaming was so reflexive, so automatic, that I almost laughed. This was the woman who'd raised me, who'd read me bedtime stories and packed my school lunches and promised to always protect me. And here she sat, suggesting I deserved to be beaten because I got upset. Tyler stepped forward, his voice cold with controlled anger. Mrs. Lawson, with all due respect, there is no excuse for what Derek did today. There's no excuse for any of the times he hurt Rachel over the years. And the fact that you're sitting here defending him instead of demanding he face consequences tells me everything I need to know about why this abuse continued for so long. My mother's face flushed. You don't know what it's like being married to a man like Derek. He can be wonderful and loving, but he has demons. His father was violent, his first marriage ended badly. He needs support and understanding, not persecution. Then he needs a therapist and anger management, not a wife and stepdaughter to terrorize, Tyler shot back. But instead of getting help, he spent 12 years systematically abusing Rachel while you stood by and enabled it. You're as responsible for her suffering as he is. Linda stood abruptly, anger finally breaking through her defeated demeanor. How dare you judge me? You have no idea what I've sacrificed, what I've endured to keep this family together. After Rachel's father died, I was drowning. Derek saved us. He gave us stability and security. So yes, he has a temper. So yes, sometimes things get out of hand. But that doesn't erase everything good he's done. I felt something break inside me, some last fragile hope that my mother might finally choose me over him. She couldn't do it. Even now, even after everything, she couldn't acknowledge that Derek's violence was his choice and his responsibility alone. The officer who'd been waiting outside the study stepped in. "Mrs. Lawson, I need you to come with me. We have more questions about the financial accounts opened in your name." Linda looked at me one last time, her expression pleading. "Rachel, please. Don't let them destroy our family over one mistake. Tell them Derek didn't mean it. Tell them you're not pressing charges." I met her eyes and saw a stranger, a woman who'd chosen her abuser over her own daughter so many times that she'd lost the ability to see clearly anymore. "I'm pressing charges, Mom. And I'm getting a restraining order. If you want to stay with Derek, if you want to keep making excuses for him, that's your choice. But I'm done protecting him. I'm done protecting you from the consequences of enabling his violence." Her face crumpled, but I turned away before I could see if the tears were genuine or manipulative. Tyler guided me back toward the room where Jake and the others waited, and I didn't look back. Behind me, I heard my mother sobbing, asking the officer how this could be happening, insisting there had to be some mistake. But there was no mistake. There was only truth, finally spoken aloud after 12 years of silence. And the truth was setting me free, even as it shattered what remained of my family. Derek's bail hearing on Monday morning was exactly what Detective Santos had predicted. The judge took one look at the video evidence Jake had captured, listened to the prosecutor outline the pattern of abuse documented over 18 months, and set bail at $250,000. Derek's face went white when the amount was announced. His attorney, a nervous young man from a discount legal service, stammered objections about his client's clean record and standing in the community. The prosecutor calmly presented Derek's prior arrest in California, the HR complaints from Patterson Industries, and testimony from 3 former neighbors who'd heard violence through the walls over the years. Bail stood. Derek was remanded back to custody until he could post bond, which, given his actual financial situation versus the image he projected, would take time he didn't have. I watched from the gallery as officers led him away, his eyes finding mine across the courtroom with a look of pure hatred. Tyler's arm tightened around my shoulders, a reminder that Derek's power over me was finally broken. Jake sat on my other side, his presence no longer feeling like an invasion but like the protection it had always been. The restraining orders were issued that same afternoon, covering both my mother and me for a radius of 500 feet. Linda signed hers reluctantly, still insisting this was all a terrible overreaction. She'd hired her own attorney by then, someone Derek's family had recommended, and was preparing to testify on his behalf at trial. The division was complete. My mother had chosen her side, and it wasn't mine. Tyler and I postponed the wedding indefinitely. The thought of celebrating while criminal proceedings loomed felt wrong, and honestly, the fairy tale of the perfect wedding day had been shattered beyond repair. Instead, we focused on practical matters. I moved my belongings out of the apartment I'd been renting and into Tyler's house on the north side of Riverside. Amanda helped me pack, carefully wrapping the few items I'd saved from my childhood, things Derek hadn't managed to destroy or discard during his years of erasing my father's memory from our home. The trial was set for 4 months later, which Jake explained was actually fast by court standards. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Catherine Wells, met with me weekly to prepare my testimony. She walked me through what to expect, how Derek's attorney would try to discredit me, paint me as a troubled girl who'd never accepted her stepfather and was now seeking revenge for perceived slights. She coached me on staying calm, sticking to facts, letting the evidence speak for itself. Patterson Industries fired Derek 2 weeks after his arrest. The HR complaints that had been quietly buried for years suddenly became liability issues the company couldn't ignore. His income vanished, which meant his ability to post bail vanished with it. He remained in county jail, growing more desperate and angry with each passing week. Kevin tried multiple times to contact me, leaving voicemails that started sympathetic and turned threatening. Jake had each message documented as potential witness intimidation. The weeks passed in a strange suspended reality. I returned to work at Mountain View Elementary School, where I taught 2nd grade. My principal had been understanding about the time I'd needed off, and my colleagues rallied around me with the kind of fierce support that teachers show their own. Several admitted they'd noticed bruises over the years, had worried but hadn't known how to help. Their guilt mirrored my own, this shared sense that somehow we should have stopped it sooner. My mother tried to reach me twice. Once through Pastor Brooks, who gently refused to serve as a messenger. Once through Amanda, who told her firmly that until Linda was ready to acknowledge the truth about Derek, she had nothing to say to me that I needed to hear. The separation hurt, but it also felt necessary. I couldn't heal while still trying to save someone who didn't want to be saved. The trial arrived in October, 4 months after what should have been my wedding day. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, less dramatic than television had led me to believe. But the weight of it was real. Derek sat at the defense table looking thinner and harder than I remembered, his eyes tracking my every movement as I entered. Jake sat in the front row behind the prosecution, his badge visible on his belt, a silent reminder of the authority and evidence backing every word I was about to speak. My testimony took an entire day. Catherine Wells walked me through my history with Derek, starting with those early months when he'd seemed like an answer to our family's grief. I described the gradual shift, the first signs of control and criticism. Then the first act of violence, the bruises, the excuses, the years of walking on eggshells and believing I somehow deserved the treatment I received. Derek's attorney objected repeatedly, trying to paint my memories as exaggerated or fabricated. But each time, Catherine produced evidence to support my statements. Medical records, witness testimonies, the spreadsheet Jake had compiled with dates and details that made denial impossible. The video from the wedding day was played for the jury. Watching it on the courtroom screen felt surreal, seeing myself in that blood-stained wedding dress, hearing the crack of impact, Derek's voice dripping with contempt as he called me ungrateful and weak. Several jurors flinched. One woman in the back row wiped tears from her eyes. When it ended, the silence in the courtroom was absolute. Derek took the stand in his own defense, which his attorney had apparently advised against. He tried to present himself as a misunderstood man who'd done his best to raise a difficult stepdaughter. He claimed I'd been rebellious and disrespectful, that the wedding day incident was a momentary loss of control after years of provocation. But Catherine Wells destroyed him on cross-examination. She produced the California arrest record, played recordings of him screaming at my mother behind closed doors, showed financial records proving he'd stolen from Linda and lied about his income. By the time she finished, Derek's mask of reasonableness had completely cracked, revealing the rage underneath. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. Felony assault and battery, multiple counts of domestic violence, financial fraud, and coercive control. The judge sentenced him to 8 years in prison with possibility of parole after 5. It wasn't life, but it was justice. It was freedom. It was the first time in 12 years that I could breathe without fear. Tyler and I got married 6 months later in a quiet ceremony at Lakeside Park with just our closest friends present. No fancy venue, no elaborate plans, just 2 people who loved each other making promises in front of the people who mattered most. Jake stood as Tyler's best man again, this time without the weight of a secret investigation hanging over the celebration. Amanda cried through the entire ceremony, happy tears that matched my own. My mother didn't attend. She'd stood by Derek throughout the trial, visiting him in jail, insisting to anyone who'd listened that the prosecution had railroaded an innocent man. We hadn't spoken since that day in Pastor Brooks' study. I'd learned through mutual acquaintances that she'd moved to a smaller apartment, was working part-time at a retail store, had become something of a pariah in Riverside County for her continued defense of a convicted abuser. Part of me grieved for her, for the relationship we'd never have. But mostly I felt relief that I no longer had to carry the weight of her choices alongside my own. Jake came to the wedding reception and pulled me aside during the dancing. "I wanted to give you something," he said, handing me a USB drive. "This contains everything. All the evidence, all the documentation, all the work that went into making sure Derek couldn't hurt you anymore. It's yours now. Do whatever you want with it. Keep it, destroy it, forget it ever existed." I turned the small drive over in my hands, feeling the weight of 18 months of investigation compressed into a few grams of plastic and metal. "Thank you," I said, the words feeling inadequate for what he'd given me. Not just evidence, but my life back. My future. My freedom. Jake shook his head. Thank Tyler. He's the one who trusted me enough to let me do what needed to be done. And thank yourself for being strong enough to tell the truth when it mattered most. That night, Tyler and I drove to the coast for our honeymoon, something simple and uncomplicated. We walked on the beach at sunset, talking about everything and nothing, making plans for a future that finally felt real. The bruises had faded from my face months ago, but the scars Derek left weren't all visible. I still flinched at raised voices. I still apologized too much for things that weren't my fault. But I was healing, slowly, with Tyler's patient love and therapy sessions with Dr. Emily Reed, who'd kept my notes from years ago and now helped me process the trauma those notes had documented. A year after the trial, I received a letter from the prison. Derek wanted to meet, claimed he'd found religion, said he wanted to apologize and seek forgiveness. I read the letter once, then burned it in our fireplace while Tyler watched. Some people deserved forgiveness. Some people earned redemption. Derek Lawson was neither. He'd had 12 years to change, 12 years to choose differently. He'd made his choices, and now he lived with the consequences. I made my own choice that night, watching the letter curl and blacken in the flames. I chose to stop looking back. I chose to build a life defined not by what had been done to me but by what I would create going forward. I chose freedom, real freedom, the kind that comes not from escaping your abuser but from refusing to let their violence define your story. Derek had taken 12 years from me, but he wouldn't get another day. The rest of my life was mine, and I intended to live it fully, fearlessly, on my own terms. That was the justice Jake had fought for, Tyler had supported, and I had finally claimed. That was the wedding gift no ceremony could provide, the promise that mattered more than any vow. I was free, and I was never going back. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.